The world's greatest geologist is on the verge of his next billion-dollar discovery. With looming shortages in copper, zinc, gold, and silver, this may be the best opportunity hard asset investors have ever faced. Learn more at futuremoneytrends.com/hardassets.
At the same time, and monetary fundamentals, whereas every bank in the world, central bank, is printing money like it's going out of style.
I want to get into that, but before we get into the money printing, on the mining side, I just spoke to a friend prior to calling you. He runs a mining company. He was showing me a recent transaction. The company was basically $110 million 5 years ago. It just got purchased for 1.6 million Canadian, and it got purchased for 1.6 million Canadian in shares of the other stock that was acquiring it. So it certainly is an extremely bloody situation. Now, for listeners who are listening to Andy, he does represent a bullion company because he's very passionate about the physical precious metals, and he believes that's the most prudent thing you can do right now is own those metals. But he also was a mining analyst for years and even helped, I think roughly, you probably had 20 to 30 clients that were mining companies at the time when you were at Torrey Hills. I want to ask you, so people understand the dire situation in the mining sector, once this supply is gone, because these companies either go bankrupt, they go away, they shut down the mine, how long does it take a mining company to even get something into production from zero to production? And then how long would it take a decommissioned mine to go into production? This isn't something that can be fixed overnight because gold goes up $1,000.
Right. And again, I mean, this is a big question. Remember, I spent 10 years on Wall Street as an oil field service sell-side analyst. So I've watched, the same thing happen in the oil industry when you had a massive, in fact, I came into that industry in the mid-90s after a 15-year depression in oil. And then I watched what happened when you had the price of oil temporarily crash to $10 a barrel in late 98, early 99. And we saw what happened then when, that's when you had Exxon and Mobil merged and BP, Amoco, Arco, and Texaco, and Chevron, and et cetera, all these companies, ConocoPhillips, they shut everything down. A lot of companies went bankrupt, and the bigger companies spent years, consolidating and high grading their prospects and shutting down production and reducing capex. And then getting things back is another story, because again, you put all that time and effort into the mine, and then you mothball it. It takes an incredible amount of time and effort to unmothball it, getting the people back and recommissioning it and getting your permits. And of course, you need a lot of capital for that, and you need much higher prices. And a lot of things, in oil, for instance, a lot of times once you shut that well in, it'll never get the pressure back. It's not quite the same with mining, but it's similar type issues. Once you stop something, the momentum is the inertia. It's very hard to start it up again. And again, unlike oil, where there's been tons of discoveries, there's been no discoveries in gold and silver. It's been, we picked the high hanging fruit long ago. And there hasn't been a single. In fact, I wrote an article a few years ago, probably in 2012. I think it was called "The Only Major Discovery of the Last 10 Years Gone Goodbye." I was talking about the discovery they made in Ecuador, Aurelian Resources, the Fruta del Norte mine back in like 2006 or 7, not mine, the Fruta del Norte deposit, and they never developed it because the Ecuadorian government wants a 70% royalty. And that was the only major discovery that I can remember in my 13 and a half years in this business. So it's not like there's discoveries out there waiting to be, to be done. I mean, yeah, there's stuff like the one in Chile with Barrick, which will never get done for a lot of legal reasons. But most of it is just simply they shut stuff in that was marginal in the first place. It needs dramatically higher prices to even be considered. And once that process goes, it's going to be years coming to get it going.
It's an interesting setup where you have a collapsing mining industry, slowing economies, and then now we've got the Fed, who, I mean, give me a break. It was never going to happen. If it did happen, it was going to be like nothing, like 0.25%. increase, and now that everybody's speculating, will they raise rates? I mean, it's ridiculous.
It was never going to happen. I said all along it was never going to happen. Why would it happen? Why would you? What gets lost in the whole thing is logic. It's like this. I'm a Met fan. This baseball slide. Everyone's so worried about whether he touched the base when the big picture is he tackled the guy. And the same thing with the Fed, with the rates. Why would the Fed be raising rates when, as I say, we are in the worst global economy of our lifetimes? I mean, when you talk about the Baltic Dry Index and the CRB Commodity Index and Chinese imports and exports collapsing and our unemployment, the lowest labor participation rate essentially in the history of the nation, and everyone's going, well, they're going to raise rates. Why would they raise rates? The debt of the Federal Reserve alone, they're holding $4.5 trillion of toxic, overvalued bond securities. Why would they raise rates and put a gun to their head? Remember, their job is to support the U.S. government, no matter what anyone says about their independence. So if the U.S. government is the most indebted entity in the history of the planet, why would they raise rates and do so during a bad economy? It's really just kind of this whole face-saving thing. It goes back to 2013. I love to talk about that closed-door meeting that Obama had with the too-big-to-fail CEOs, all of them in April 11, 2013. And then 2 days later, gold falls $100 and silver falls $6 an ounce for no reason. And then all of a sudden, you hear the term tapering starts coming in, and recovery and the rate hikes. And the fact is that here we are years later, and things are much worse. And people are talking, and every bank in the world, every central bank is lowering rates to zero or negative, and they're all QEing it to infinity and having this final currency war, which I predicted 2.5 years ago. And they're going, well, the Fed's going to raise rates. No, why would they raise rates? And if they did, again, they're talking about a quarter point. How would a quarter point matter anyway? In fact, it would matter because it would cause markets to sell off even more, because historically overvalued financial markets that are based on record low interest rates have nowhere to go but down if you raise rates even a tiny bit. So again, it was never going to happen. Again, that propaganda leg of the evil tripod is broken. No one is listening anymore. And so what's next to go is going to be the market manipulation. Obviously, they're losing control. They've lost control of commodities. They've lost control of currencies. A lot of stock markets are in bear markets right now. I wrote about, quote, the last to go markets a few months back, where I said, look, the last things that they're going to lose control of are going to be like the Dow and the paper, gold, and silver markets, because they're the most widely watched and important. But they've been losing a lot of markets, and eventually they'll lose all of them. And they may lose them, by the way, to hyperinflation, and they may lose them to a 2008 style crash. So either way, it's going to be in real terms losses. I mean, you look at the Venezuelan stock market. It's the best performing market in the world right now, and the country's falling apart. So don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if the Dow does what the Venezuelan stock market does.
Yeah, so for 2016, are we looking at the helicopter money? Are we looking at complete chaos? Potentially with the money printing? Absolutely.
I mean, it's, like I said, when I predicted the Chinese devaluation of the yuan, the day before, I said the upcoming cataclysmic financial bang to end all big bangs, they just started the process. They just took it down by about 5%. But just wait until they start really taking it down. This final currency war will go into hyperdrive, because there's not going to be a single central bank in the world that's not in easing mode. And as we know, the Yellen reversal, as I call it, has to come. It's, we're the head of the food chain, but eventually we're going to have to give up the ghost too, pretending that there's a recovery and that we're considering raising rates. And eventually, they'll lose control of markets, and they too will be forced to overtly ease. And remember, they do a lot of stuff covertly now, but they will overtly be forced to say, yes, we're considering NERP. In fact, one of the Fed governors, the guy from Minnesota, said, yes, we should do it now. They'll consider NERP. They'll consider a new round of QE. Just give it some time, and potentially not that much time.
Well, as soon as one of them starts to float it out there, it's coming. It's like 6 months away.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't help the situation, but, they think that there's some psychological advantage of saying we'll go to negative rates. And everyone else is doing it. That's the final currency war. I mean, Europe is at negative rates now. The only reason Japan's not doing it is they've run out of treasury bonds to monetize. They bought up everything already. But eventually, they're going to be forced to try it. And as I said, back in August, we are at the end of the belief that central banks can save us. So when they do it, there's a good chance that it completely backfires and is the end of the end, where, we start to hyperinflate.
Andy, there's so many scenarios that could happen. If we could just close out with, do you think it's going to be a domino effect where Japan goes, Europe goes, U.S. goes, and possibly there's even dollar rallies in the midst of that because, people are fleeing currencies? Or do you think the currency war ends with a big bang where people flood into precious metals and the fiat currencies, there has to be some type of major revisement, governments worldwide, of all currencies?
Well, again, no one has a crystal ball, but I will say that back in December 2013, not 14, 13, so we're talking about 2 years ago, I predicted that the dollar, despite my being super bullish on precious metals and talking for years about, the dollar losing its purchasing power, I said the dollar will soar against other currencies. That doesn't mean its purchasing power goes up. It means its purchasing power against other fiat trash goes up because of the liquidity vacuum of it being the reserve currency. And when you have a currency crisis, that's what happens. People go to the dollar simply because it's more liquid. And sure enough, the average currency is at an all-time low against the dollar. That doesn't mean the dollar is doing so great. Against real items of value, the cost of living over here keeps going up. But yes, I continue to believe that, barring crazy events, you talk about wars and stuff, who knows? I believe that there will be a continued collapse of as they call them, emerging market currencies, especially the ones that are heavily, heavily tied to commodities, which, by the way, is at least half of them. But again, how the dollar does against other currencies really doesn't matter. For instance, I also believe the euro is going to break up. The whole Greece thing is far from over. It'll break up. So who cares what the exchange rate is of the dollar versus the euro, especially if there isn't a euro? Or if the Japanese, which are so far along in their abenomics, that if they hyperinflate the yen, does that mean that the dollar is strong because a major economy of the world hyperinflates? No. But I do believe you're going to see the, quote, exchange rate of the dollar go up. Because look at what it's going against. But in time, the dollar will continue to lose its purchasing power until eventually there'll be a major currency crisis in which people fear the dollar itself and flee into actual real items of value like gold and silver, which they've been doing in the East, and they've been doing slowly and surely in the West, but it hasn't been the fear like you've seen in 2008 yet. But it'll come, and when it does, I don't think it will be reversed.
Andy Hoffman of MilesFranklin.com, a precious metals bullion dealership. Andy, are you guys going to be at the New Orleans show?
No, we don't go to that show. We really only go to the type of shows where we're meeting investors, not really, other vendors and companies.
All right, sir. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. You have a great day.
You too.